I'm speaking with composer Vivek Maddala, whose music has graced some amazing films across all genres, including great work on documentaries like American Revolutionary, The Evolution of Great Sleep Bogs, and Awake, The Life of Yogananda. Vivek has entered a completely different world now with The Tom and Jerry Show, which is a modern incarnation of the classic Hanna-Barbera cartoon that premiered in 1940. Vivek, thanks so much for speaking today. So great to chat again.
Glad to be with you.
So I know we did an interview a few years ago, but I would love to kind of revisit your background and kind of the story of how you entered, or how music entered your life, and at what point, I guess, what was the catalyst that put you on the path to becoming a film and TV composer?
Yeah, well, I've been writing music since I was a small child. I think I was 7 when I started, like, in earnest writing music, and my life kind of took me in 2 different paths. I was, a pretty serious musician, but then I had a good background in math and physics, and I went to music school first at Berkeley, but then I ended up going to engineering school, and I studied electrical engineering and economics as an undergrad, and then went to graduate school in electrical engineering and applied physics, and was all set to basically have a career as an engineer and a scientist. And in fact, I did for a while. But all the while, I was playing in bands and recording and writing, and eventually in 2000 there was a national competition for film scoring, and the grand prize was kind of a one-off movie deal with Warner Brothers through Turner Classic Movies. It was for scoring a silent film restoration. And so I entered the competition, and I won the grand prize, and I scored my first feature.
Wow.
That led to 5 more features, I believe, through Turner Classic Movies. Mm-hmm. I sort of became like a quasi-resident composer for a while. And that's kind of what kicked it off. And then in 2008, I did the Sundance film scoring. I got the film scoring fellowship through the Sundance Institute, and that kind of steered me a little more into independent films, which is really something I was already doing and interested in. Right. But yeah, so I mean, there were a few different kinds of knees in the curve, as it were, and my path was rather circuitous because I did pursue something else in parallel to music, and was actually quite successful in doing that for a while. But the entire time, I felt like what I really wanted to do was write music. Even though I was quite a successful engineer and scientist and doing some pretty interesting and cutting edge work, it didn't feed my soul in the way that writing music does.
So you were on a path to becoming really rich and really an engineer, and decided to go with the career that is the hardest.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, it was never about money or income.
Exactly. I know. That's always the best part. I mean, you see something like that, and it's like, I know, it's just amazing how music and artistic expression speaks to us, and it's like, okay, this is a career path that is completely defined and set, and then it's like, no, this is what means something,
Yeah, and the thing is, I was always doing it in parallel, and it's very funny. There's an interesting article I read about Walter Becker a few years ago. I think it was in Rolling Stone magazine. Walter Becker was the bass player and guitar player from Steely Dan. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah.
So depending on the track, he was either playing guitar or bass. And the interviewer asked him, "Okay, so are you really a guitar player or are you really a bass player? Like, do you lean more in one direction or the other?" And his answer was, I thought, kind of interesting. He said whenever he was playing bass, he felt like he was really a guitar player who just happened to be playing bass at the time. And whenever he was playing guitar, he felt like he was really a bass player who just happened to play. Whenever he was doing one, he felt like he should have been doing the other.
Right.
And that was kind of me. When I was in engineering school and when I was working as a scientist, I I always had just melodies kind of pouring out of me, and I was always tapping out rhythms, and that's really what I wanted to do, was to make music every time when I was in the lab, when I was, solving differential equations. Really, my mind was in music. And interestingly, when I was in music school, I did feel a little bit of pressure, or I did feel compelled in some way to do something maybe a little more cerebral.
Right.
But what's interesting about film scoring is I feel like to some extent it exists at the intersection of these things, because when you're scoring a film, to a large extent, you're solving a series of problems. In addition to writing music, you're actually sort of decoding sort of meta messages, as it were, from the director and the editor and the producer. You're interpreting what they want to say. You're solving dramatic problems that the picture and the characters are posing, and you have to do it creatively. And so, there are a lot of parallels.
Absolutely. And I also think music has a similar, very kind of, music has a set structure. It's very kind of mathematic in that way, where you have almost equations to solve, and using those kind of notes are kind of the numbers. But you can create so many different outcomes from them instead of just, one fixed answer.
Yeah, it's true. Although, frankly, when writing music, at least my experience is it is pretty visceral, and by that I mean, for me, it's pretty much exclusively visceral. I mean, we can, after you've written a piece of music, you can go back and analyze it and deconstruct it and look at the underlying, perhaps mathematical architecture.
Right.
But no, I don't think anybody. Maybe people do, but I don't have any experience with actually writing music from an analytical place. I make choices based on artistic expression and how it makes me feel and how I want to steer the listener from an emotional standpoint. So while it's true that you can find things, you can find mathematical structures, Fibonacci series, and various things. That go back to Euclidean geometry and so on. You can find those structures embedded within music theory. I don't actually think about those things.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, music is an emotional response. And so when you approach a project, I mean, no matter what it is, I mean, and it's literally the starting point of your writing process, where does that first note come from? Is there something specific you look at to pull that first note out of you? Do you watch the film? And maybe tinker on the piano while the picture's on your monitor, or do you watch the film completely with your hands in your lap and then try to write something after you've reflected on it? I mean, is there kind of a process you have, or does it just depend on what you're working on?
I would say I do have a process, although I'm not that rigid about it.
Uh-huh.
Generally, I do watch the film, and I don't. I might be thinking about music in my head, or I might come up with things sort of spontaneously in my head, but I don't actually sit with an instrument when I'm first watching the film. I'd rather kind of let it wash over me and kind of marinate in the story and in the characters and in the structure, and then start to think about ideas. And usually I try to find something about the characters that really that I find compelling. Mm-hmm. And often that's where I start. But there's also, typically before I start, I have a spotting session with the director.
Right.
And when we talk about all sorts of things, I generally try to avoid talking about music with directors. I try to rather talk about characters and the situations they're experiencing and how we want the audience to feel, and what's working and what's not working, and what does the director want to convey to the audience right now that maybe is not being conveyed, and maybe that's something that's a function that the music score can have. It's a little different with with Tom and Jerry, with the cartoon that I'm scoring,
right.
In that after the first few episodes, I stopped having spotting sessions. And I pretty much, Warner Brothers and certainly the director, they kind of let me do whatever I want, which is great. I mean, it gives me quite a bit of autonomy.
Yeah.
But also, we have a common understanding about what the show needs, and I sort of know what sorts of things they like. And on occasion, I will bring things up with the director. So, in the last couple of episodes, there were interesting new characters that were introduced, where there were references to English literature and other things that I wanted to clarify and find out if some of these characters are going to be recurring characters. I should write a theme that will then be threaded through the score and through subsequent episodes. And
right.
And if there's going to be some kind of development with that character, it would be nice to be able to maybe plant some seeds now that'll pay off later in the season, that sort of thing. But for the most part, I don't have spotting sessions with the director on Tom and Jerry these days. But that's quite different than it is on other TV series and certainly on films where there's quite a bit of interaction going back and forth. And one of the things I really like to do actually is to sit in the room with the director periodically when I'm and perhaps the editor and producer, other interested parties, filmmakers, and actually sit in the same room and listen to the same stuff and breathe the same air and kind of absorb each other's energy. I find that can be valuable.
Right, almost like watching it. Like, I don't know, when I present something, I always disembody myself and I kind of imagine the person next to me watching it. I don't know if that makes sense. It's just like, you're putting yourself in, like, I wonder, and you're trying to almost like reacting to it as how you want them to react to it.
Right, kind of imagine. Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So for Tom and Jerry, I mean, one of the most iconic characters in pop culture, and the cartoon shorts from back in the 1940s when that premiered gave us so much amazing music. I mean, from composers like Scott Radley, who worked on the original Tom and Jerry, and then of course Carl Stalling, who worked on many Looney Tunes and Silly Symphony scores for Disney. So when you took over Tom and Jerry, what was the goal? I guess was the goal to keep in that tradition of the kind of Mickey Mousing type of scoring that the genre is known for, or did you try to find new ways to tweak the approach for this generation of audiences?
Both. So the early conversations I had with Daryl Van Sitters, who was the director for all the episodes, definitely Scott Bradley and the original 1940s style approach came up quite often, and they were definitely interested in that, and for good reason, because if you watch particularly the first decade of the Tom and Jerry shorts from, I think the first one came out in, you mentioned 1940. I think it was, like something like December of 1940.
Yeah.
And that generation continued, I think, into the 50s. If you watch those shorts and listen to those scores, they're really remarkable. They're beautiful. They're melodic, and clever, and so for good reason. I think they wanted to continue in that tradition. Now, a lot has happened in the subsequent decades.
Yes.
In terms of music, in terms of culture, in terms of a lot of things. So we have a lot more to draw from now.
Right.
So while the music that I'm writing is fundamentally steeped in, 19th century romanticism and 20th century, early 20th century types of musical constructs, Gershwin and the things that had been around. I do have the ability to draw from things that are more recent and to paint with more modern colors, and I do actually, which is a lot of fun. But fundamentally, I would say the music does function in a similar way to the original series.
I mean, I grew up watching those things, and it's probably the first movie I ever watched was Fantasia. I mean, that's something there with just no dialogue and just music and images. And Tom and Jerry are of course known for not speaking, and it's really
right.
the music carrying the action. So yeah, the music essentially follows the action and motion of the character. So if someone falls or rolls or jumps, all those actions have to be mimicked in the music. So the music has to fall and roll or jump. Have you developed, I guess, techniques for what a fall or a jump should sound like? Have you kind of put that in like your reservoir of like, okay, that's what this fall is going to sound like? I mean, how do you create a fall or musically?
Yeah, so it's all different because it's based it's sort of based on context and what's happening, and also at the same time. These are not discrete musical gestures,
right.
that can sort of you can populate like you're putting together a puzzle or something. It's there is there's the score basically has like melody and counterpoint kind of all the time, and they're larger musical arcs, and so all of the Mickey Mousing, as it were. Happens within the context of the larger musical picture. So it depends on a variety of factors. I don't have like a set of techniques that I'll use for a particular kind of physical action that needs to be tied to a musical event. It can be any number of things. Um, and I'm continually trying to come up with new ways of doing it.
Yeah.
One, it's more interesting for me, and then it's of course more interesting, I think, for the audience if these kinds of physical gestures are tied to different sorts of musical events. But I'm not sure if I'm really answering your question, but
Oh, yes, you are.
it can't, yeah, it can be any number of things. And and I try to make it sort of inventive and clever and hopefully funny. One of the things about the classic Tom and Jerry show from the 1940s is it wasn't, the action over subsequent generations of the show. I think it developed a reputation for being very violent.
Yeah.
And in fact, like the Itchy and Scratchy spoof on The Simpsons is basically mocking that, right? What the ridiculously violent show that Tom and Jerry became. So the new show is actually more like the original. So the violence is more cartoonish, and the action is frankly it's not that violent. And interestingly, sometimes Tom and Jerry, who are ostensibly rivals, do team up together to solve problems, or to address something where they have a common interest, and there are real moments of sweetness and things that you might not expect if you haven't seen the show in a while, or if you're not familiar with the original series.
Right, absolutely.
So a lot of the music that's tied to physical action on the screen, it really, frankly, could be anything. And one of the things that's kind of clever, or I think that's fun about the new show, is the ways in which the writers are layering, weaving into the story various layers of allegory and references to things that are happening in pop culture, or historical events that have happened, or things that children may not appreciate. And it is essentially a children's show, but my thinking is that the writers realize that probably adults will have to be watching this show with children.
Right.
If you've got kids, you're probably going to watch it with your kids, and you'll be bored out of your mind if it's just the same old cat and mouse gag over and over.
Yeah.
So there are all sorts of things that are kind of fun. Like in the last season, there was Tom the cat. He has his love interest in this one particular episode is a cat named Toodles, and she's a dancer. And it turns out that it's kind of a little side plot, but it turns out she's a spot welder during the day, like that's her day job, and then she dances in clubs at night. So obviously, the spot welder, how arbitrary is that, right? So obviously, that's a Flashdance reference,
right?
So and that, again, little kids are not going to get that reference, but the adults, some of them might.
Yeah.
So it was an opportunity to weave in a little bit of that sort of early '80s. Lindrum, Michael Cimbello maniac type of texture into parts of the score that, might bring a smile to the face of someone who gets the reference. And there are all sorts of, little things in the story that, again, that sometimes comment on current events, or things that are that wouldn't be appreciated by a child. And so those are opportunities to do things musically that they could be kind of inventive or clever. So, it's a pretty broad canvas. And like I said, Warner's has been quite hands off in terms of allowing me to sort of do what I think makes sense, or, to challenge myself, or maybe even bend the rules a bit and do things that are unexpected, because it can be fun.
Right. And I've always been curious. Is there ever any temp music in animation like this? Do they, maybe not now since they're very hands off, but when they first gave it to you, did they give you kind of a template of this is kind of what we've been editing to and what we've been seeing, kind of the flow of the music, or is it pretty much, do they animate to nothing?
I think they animate to nothing. I think it would be quite difficult to temp a show like this. In other words, to temp a show like this would be so labor intensive that I really don't know how they would do it. Now there are a number of episodes. There's a number of so far this season I think there's 4, and there were a handful last season where they had me pre-score some things. So they first sent me the script, and we talked about some ideas, and then they would send me some sort of crude animatic sort of storyboard drawings and some loose timing, and I did some pre-scoring that then they animated to, and on occasion they chopped and spliced the pre-score, which was a little frustrating, but it's fine. And then I get that, and then I score, sometimes rescore, but sometimes I'm able to reuse some of the pre-score.
Kind of like tighten the bolts, yeah.
Yeah, and so that's happened a few times, especially if one of the things that they've done for the new season is it looks like they're in, for some episodes they're adding songs.
Oh wow!
So where it becomes like a musical. Now Tom and Jerry never speak, but some of the ancillary characters do, and so on occasion they might break into a song, and it's sort of like an old school Hollywood musical, and so that's a situation where obviously the song has to be written before they animate, and in fact the voiceover actor or actors who are singing have to learn the song, or at least be able to perform the song during the voiceover sessions, and so some of that has to happen first as well. But to answer your question directly, I don't think they're actually using any kind of temp other than something that I'm
right, and that's why I kind of, that makes the most sense to me. It's like, because some of the I guess the motion on screen is so tied to what the music would be, so to have your music there first, I think makes a lot of sense.
But it's pretty rare. Like I said, for the most part, when they've had me pre-score something, it's because there was, a very particular kind of, whether it's a song or, maybe it's a dance number, and they just want to make sure that the tempo is going, that the footfalls will line up correctly, with the tempo. But the majority of it is, I get it, and it's completely silent, and there's never been any music, and it's just a matter of
bringing it to life, pretty much.
Of creating new musical images, as it were.
Yeah. So, kind of in your opinion, why do you think Tom and Jerry how come they have survived in pop culture all these years? I mean, we were talking about the start of 1940, and it's 2017, and we still have the show. In your opinion, why has these characters have survived this long?
Well, I mean, I guess the cat and the mouse are iconic, symbolic. There's something that's sort of universal about that relationship.
Yeah.
It's primal, and it's, I guess, cats and mice are things that, have a relationship, have a natural relationship in the world. And it is what it is. And there's a kind of a hierarchical thing there. And the fact that sometimes, or very often, the mouse can outsmart at least, I don't know in the real world, but in the cartoon, the mouse, Jerry, does outsmart the cat, and that can lead to comical moments. I don't know. Other than the universality of the cat and the mouse, there's something endearing about those characters. I don't know.
I think, for me, it's, growing up with that, just, they're unique because they don't speak. I mean, you have Sylvester and Tweety, but those are talking characters. Roadrunner and Coyote. Wile E. Coyote is kind of in that fashion where there's no dialogue, but I think the no dialogue and just the slapstick comedy of it, and I don't know, it's just something about it. It's so entertaining, and it's
It can be, and also one of the in contrast to you mentioned Roadrunner, that was kind of the same gag over and over with different variations, right? And Tom and Jerry is not that at all. There's all sorts of, especially, interestingly, I don't know if you know this, but in the new show, there are we have sort of parallel kind of series where, so there's the classic cat and the mouse where they live in a house, and, the cat is sort of the house pet, and then there's a rodent living in the walls, and the humans seem to be unaware of that.
Right.
and the but Tom is aware, and they have their antagonistic relationship. But then there's a another series that's sort of a sub-series within this show that they refer to as Downton Abbey, and it's obviously based on the the PBS show Downton Abbey, or I guess was it a BBC show? I forget. And the premise is that it's a early 20th century English manor somewhere in the countryside, I guess northern, and there's this house cat who's a servant cat named Tom, and and the butler, who I guess his name was Carson on Downton Abbey, and his name is Cates on this show. Uh-huh. He finds that there's a mouse living in the house, and Tom's job is to get the mouse before the aristocrats find out and freak out. But of course, Tom is incompetent, and so hilarity ensues. And so this is I've done, I don't know, 4 or 5 of those so far, and that's a whole other premise, and that's a whole other kind of fun thing. There's also these detective shows where Tom and Jerry play detectives, and they have to solve crimes, and it's very film noir. It's sort of this Raymond Chandler kind of Humphrey Bogart style 1930s 1940s detective thing.
Yeah.
And so the music is very film noir, which is a lot of fun. And then there's a new one that we're starting up called that we're calling Castlevania, which is based in early 1930s horror. And they're all quite different, but still the common thread is the cat and the mouse, but their relationship sometimes is different, and it's fun.
That sounds, I mean, it just sounds like there's so many layers and everything. It sounds fantastic. And it airs on Cartoon Network, which is I actually work at Cartoon Network Studios, so it's
oh, you do? Nice.
I do. It's a Warner Brothers show, so I actually work at the studio that makes our originals, Adventure Time and stuff like that. But it's airing on the network that shares the space with our shows, so it's part of the family. And
cool.
But if you had to pick one to kind of a question to end it, if you had to pick one other classic cartoon character that you would love to write music for, be it from the Warner Brothers family or the Disney camp, Silly Symphonies or Looney Tunes or the MGM world, what would it be? Or who would it be?
Another character.
Bugs Bunny or Elmer Fudd. I mean, who would be fun? Top of your list.
I got to tell you, I'm bending the question a bit, okay. But
bend away.
I got to tell you, like, it's been a few years since I've seen The Simpsons, but I used to love that show.
Yeah.
I think I would love to work on a show like that, or I did see a few episodes of Futurama, which I think might have been some of the same people who made that. So I mean, there's so many great cartoons, and I guess my clumsy answer to your question might be that I think I might want to seek out new characters. When you're writing music for existing established characters, there's a history there, and you're following in other people's footsteps and standing on their shoulders, and it might be nice. I might be interested in scoring a character that's new, that doesn't have that pedigree, and maybe that doesn't have the history, and create something new.
Well, that's a great answer. And Vivek, I just want to thank you again for your time this evening, and I've always been such a huge fan of your work, and
thank you.
It was such great chatting with you, and I hope we get to do it again soon.
Okay.